In our previous lecture here on Genesis, we discussed Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 19, the first 4 days of creation. We, of course, before that, also included an introduction to the Bible, the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, Mosaic authorship, and some of the terminology, especially Yahweh and Elohim, which are used in the text. Today, we begin this lecture with Genesis chapter 1, verse 20, the 5th day. God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." And God created the great living creatures of the sea, living and moving things, with which the water teems according to their kinds, every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful, increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." There was evening, there was morning, the 5th day. The first 6 days parallel each other. Day 1 parallels day 4. Day 2 parallels day 5. Day 3 parallels day 6. How is that? Day 1, God says, "Let there be light." Day 4, God says, "Let there be lights." You will recall that on day 1, the light was just light separated from darkness. God called the light day, the darkness he called night. And on day 4, God made the lights, that is, the sun and the moon, but Moses does not call them that because he doesn't want to give them names, in contrast to so many previous things and following things in the chapter that are given names. But here he just calls them lights, and the reason for that we think is because the people of Egypt, from whom Moses is bringing the children of Israel, and the people of Babylonia, where Abraham came from, worshipped the sun as a god, the moon as a goddess. And so Moses is saying these are not gods and goddesses, they are created lights made by the real God, the creator of the entire universe. So day 2 parallels day 5 in that in day 2, there was an expanse made between the waters above the earth and the waters below the earth. The waters above the expanse and the waters below the expanse. And that expanse God called sky. Here on day 5, the sky and the water figure again, because this time God is populating these two things. He's populating the water with animals, fish, and creatures of the sea, and he's populating the sky with birds. Now, God says, "Let these living creatures fly across, let the birds fly across the earth, across the expanse of the sky." Now, birds were considered to be often messengers of the gods. Romans, Greeks, some of them, they would open up a bird and examine the entrails and everything and try to detect the future. Why specifically a bird? Because birds fly across the sky. When you stand on the earth and you look up at the sky, you see way up there, of course, the sun, the moon, the stars. But in between, you see the birds flying across the sky. And so it is, you can see from that people might come up with primitive people might come up with the concept that the birds were messengers between the gods, the sun, the moon that they worshipped, and the earth. So they can't bring down the sun, the moon, the stars, but they can bring down the messengers and see if they can detect God's will from those. So the birds are flying above the sky, and God creates also the great creatures of the sea, every living thing with which the water teems. You will begin to, of course, these are huge things, great creatures of the sea, and they don't have to go into the ark because they're not threatened by flood. They live in the water, so they are quite fine. No blue whales in the ark. Now, God saw that this is good. God blessed them, and he said, "Be fruitful and multiply, and increase in number, and let the water and fill the waters of the seas and let the birds increase on the earth. So he wants them to multiply, even as on the fourth day he wanted, on the third day rather, he wanted the plants to multiply. Now he's saying the same thing to the fish and birds. Or to be more general, the sea creatures and the air creatures. Then God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals according to its kind." You may remember that on the third day, plants were categorized in two groups, ones with the seeds on the outside and ones with the seeds inside. And there is a poem called the Modern Hiawatha that says, "When he slew the Mudjekevis, of the skin he made him mittens, made them with the fur side inside, made them with the skin side outside. He to get the warm side inside, put the cold side skin side outside. He to get the cold side outside, put the warm side fur side inside." That's why he put fur side inside, why he put the skin side outside when he turned them inside outside. Now we're getting a categorization of the animals into three groups. This is also anthropocentric because the animals are categorized according to how humans look at them, not necessarily how the animals look at themselves. There are, for the first kind, livestock. So the large quadrupeds that are more docile and more helpful to human beings, that the cattle, sheep, goats, buffalo, cows, these are the pigs, the quadrupeds that human beings would use on their farms. And of course, not only quadrupeds, how about we can bring along some of the non-flying birds, the birds that walk along the ground and are used in farms. And so these creatures that move along the ground, the livestock is number one. Number two, creatures that move along the ground. Now at this point, you will get a further, more specific categorization in Moses' books in Leviticus, of course, with clean and unclean animals, and you will see a bit of that here in Genesis, but more specific categorization in Leviticus. But here, it is all the creatures that move along the ground. Everything that is the small crawling creatures, everything from lizards to insects to all the little creatures that crawl along the ground. They're not the big farm animals, and they're not the big vicious wild beasts. So a badger, a skunk, and a millipede, it's all together here in one categorization of the animals that crawl along the ground. And then third is the wild animals. This would be the ones that want to hunt you instead of just you hunting them. So lions and tigers and bears, oh my, lions and tigers and bears. The big vicious beasts that would eat you as readily as you would try to kill them. So God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. As we said in the previous lecture, kind here is not a scientific term. It does not equate to species. Kind refers only to reproduction. And so therefore, a human being may make a mistake in terms of species, but here we're just saying things reproduce after their reproductive capacity, and that can be mismeasured by human beings. Human beings can say that certain animals only reproduce such and such, and human beings can be wrong about that. And further observation may prove that these animals do make adjustments. We've had that happen in recent years, where people said that acquired characteristics are not passed on; they're not inherited. Well, guess what? We have found out that the creature's adaptive ability can change the DNA, and they can adjust the DNA to something that it is more adaptive, fit for survival in the new environment that is changing. That's just part of their adaptability to the environment. They start reproducing. Animals have been shown now to adjust the DNA to the next generation. So kind here means only reproduction and nothing else. They reproduce after their reproductive capacity, and that is known, of course, by God, because God, by definition, knows everything, but it is learned by human beings, discovered by human beings. God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." Now, God created him in his own image, in the image of God. He created him, male and female. He created them. Let's deal with this part first. Let us make man. Now, some people long ago, and not recently, have said that the us here, which is reproduced in other texts, let's look at those texts. Man has become as one of us, knowing good and evil. We will see that in Genesis chapter 3. In Genesis 6, that mankind is becoming violent, and God looks down to deal with that. Genesis 11, let us go down and confuse their speech. So these plurals, if there is only one God, which Moses is quite absolutely adamant that that is the case. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Deuteronomy 6:4. Then, what is this plural addressing? It is not addressing a supposed number of people. And this is a very big subject, but it is addressing what then? It is addressing God speaking to his court. Let's use examples of this. Job chapter 1, God speaks to his court appears before him, and God, and then of course Satan appears with them. That's God speaking to his court. 1 Kings chapter 22, prophet Micaiah says to Ahab, he says, "I saw a vision, and God said, how will we persuade Ahab to go down and come to his death?" And different angels suggested this and that. And so then God, one angel said, "I will go down and be a lying spirit in the mouths of his false prophets." And so God said, "That'll work, go do that." Now this, you see, God speaks to his court, his heavenly court, and then they respond. This is another picture of this. You see in Job, you see in 1 Kings. One of the Psalms says that God presides in his heavenly court, in his heavenly assembly. He presides over the gods, the supernatural beings. And then you of course, many of this kind of picture in the prophets. Isaiah chapter 6, the call of Isaiah, where he sees God in his heavenly court. Ezekiel sees this, Jeremiah sees this, and then in the book of Revelation, John sees this again and again, chapter 1, chapter 4, chapter 5, and onward. So God talks to his court, but when the speaking is going on, God says, us, what shall we do? But then when the action takes place, it's singular. You will see that. Here, God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish and the earth. But in verse 27, God created man in his own image. So there you have the singular. We're not created in the angel's image, we're created in God's image. But God speaks to creation, to his heavenly court, and he uses a plural then. By the way, this same custom was picked up later on, very naturally so. A king talks to his counselors, Ezra chapter 4, the king says, the letter that you sent has been read to us. Who is us? The king and his court. But now the king, being a monarch, it is not a democracy, this is a dictatorship, one-man rule, and he says, now this is what we're going to do. Others can advise, others can suggest, but someone has to decide, and that is the king, or in heaven, that is God. So God says, let us do this, but then when he does it, it's in singular form. Now, concerning in our image and in our likeness, this term, make man in our image and in our likeness, you will see later on in the genealogies, you will see that Adam and Eve, chapter 5, written account of Adam's line. When God created man, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female and blessed them, and they were created. He called them man. And then Adam lived. He had a son in his own likeness, in his own image. Exactly the same two terms, likeness and image. So, what is that? What is likeness and image? First of all, since God is a supernatural and spiritual and not material being, very clearly, image cannot mean something physical, something visual, because no man has or can see God. God is invisible, and so image is not going to be something visual. So instead, but image does have very strong physical connotations. Likeness does not. Likeness, it would be kind of like metaphor and simile. Metaphor is a strong word, and simile is a weaker word. When we say something is like something else, we say it's similar, and here we have these words, a simile, similar, likeness, and but to God's image, that's a much stronger term. Yet, since it is not physical, what does this mean? People have suggested different things at different times that this might mean. And it's interesting to see the different ideas people have had. Some people thought that it meant that human beings were bipedal. They walk on two legs, whereas animals walked on four. But that is not a satisfactory explanation, and the reason it's not satisfactory is, well, to start with, birds walk on two legs. So, but birds are very obviously distinct from human beings in this account. So then, what else might it be? You could also, of course, be aware that dogs, cats, monkeys, not dogs so much, but cats, monkeys, bears, all sometimes walk on two legs, especially if they want to see something, so they're quite capable of standing up on two legs to see what they want to see. So that's not, two legs is not the answer to image. Some people said, oh, it's language. Human beings have language that animals do not. The problem with that answer is that as time goes by, we begin to learn more and more about what different animals' language they have. For example, hunting dogs are known to coordinate their hunting, to work together as a pack by howling. The howling is not just a yowl sound, meaningless and saying, I'm here. They are talking to each other, and just because we don't understand their language doesn't mean they don't have one. And they are signaling to each other in their hunting, and it's very important for them to do this, because otherwise, if they don't hunt something down, they'll starve to death. So some animals do have language. Another example of language would be whales. Whales have been known to make calls, mating calls usually, but a sonar-like calls that can reverberate for hundreds of miles through the ocean. So they are able to call out, and something that rumbles through the water, and they are able to let people know, let other whales know that they are there and that they're looking for love, or whatever their particular purpose of their call is. I'm hungry, maybe that was one. Or I'm lonely. Anybody else out there? So different animals are quite well known to be able to signal to each other. Dolphins have been known to save human beings, of course, from sharks, especially most notoriously. But obviously, to do this, there has to be some kind of signaling going back and forth. And a marine biologist would probably be able to regale us with stories of fish and sea creatures talking back and forth to each other. Other examples. Try it with your cat sometimes. Different calls of different cats mean different things. And a purr, a yowl. I've heard so many sounds from cats that are very, very different, very, very different sounds that cats have. And the result then is that it's obviously that they're attempting to communicate. They talk to each other, and sometimes when they try to talk to us, we don't know what they're saying, just like they don't know what we're saying. And then birds. If you ever go to a place where a lot of crows are, for example, if you are walking along and the crows are all content and they're sitting up in the branches of the trees overhead, you will hear them all kind of fellowshipping with each other. Water, 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 water. All the crows saying, life is good, I'm happy, I'm content, isn't it wonderful to be together? But if you give the alarm call that crows have, this, and I may not have it right, but if you do that, and if you get the sound right, the sky will fill with those same crows circling around, looking for their friend who's in trouble. And you can almost see them with their cell phones on. You know, where's the problem? Where's the problem? Come on, let's go and let's get together with our friend. So the crows are very smart birds. James Thurber has a story where one crow, lady crow, says to her husband who's trying to leave her, he says, if you looked in any dictionary, you'll see that the crow is the smartest and most capable bird, or they were until you became one. Ah! So the bird may not use that exact vocabulary, but they certainly do have the ability to have language and talk with each other. And the intelligence of animals is surprising. In fact, learning human language, of course, you know that your dog can learn the meanings of certain words, what heel and sit and shake, and all these dogs are quite capable of learning the meaning of these words and what you want from that word. And there was a chimpanzee I saw who was told by a chimpanzee's keeper, there was a particular cup of tea or whatever it was, and the trainer says, now that needs to be stirred. And then the chimpanzee took a spoon and stirred the cup. So they know what stir means. So language, there is capability. To say that God made us in his image, and that image means we have language, and that's the image, that's not a completely satisfactory answer. Yes, we have far more advanced language. We can talk philosophy. We can have abstractions. Some people have said that in God's image might refer to self-awareness. Does a human being looking into a mirror know that reflection is themselves? Yes, human beings can learn that, and many animals don't. They're just puzzled by that. But there are animals that become aware, a few become aware to realize that that is an image of themselves. Creative ability. Is it creative? Of course, human beings have a tremendous, incredible creative ability, which is used for both productive and destructive means. But Douglas Adams, in one of his books, said that human beings thought they were smarter than the dolphins because the human beings managed to invent the wheel and New York City and nuclear weapons that killed millions of people. And while all the dolphins did was just play around, splashing around, swimming around in the water all that time. The dolphins thought, in turn, that they were smarter than the human beings for exactly the same reason. And so, again, does creativity mean that we are in God's image. The problem, of course, we have greater creativity, but the problem is that there are animals who have creativity too. I saw a picture of an elephant painting. I've seen the elephants dancing to music. I've seen we've seen pictures of dolphins or other sea creatures swaying back and forth to music. They can hear, they can detect the rhythm, and there are animals that have been known to make things, to create things. How about the ability related to this to make tools? Does that indicate that humans are made in God's image, that we can create tools? Well, guess what? You try it sometime. Go to the zoo and leave a banana outside the monkey cage, but within reach of a monkey with a stick. They are smart enough to get that stick and use it as a tool to reach out to that banana that they cannot reach with their hand, and they can reach it with that. So they're using the banana they're using the stick as a tool. So if human beings are made in God's image and animals are not, then what is that image? What is distinct to human beings that animals do not do? And here it is. God has put eternity in the hearts of human beings, the Bible says. Human beings are the only creatures who worship. Animals can show sorrow at the time of death. Greyfriars Bobby and other dogs have been known to sleep on their late master's grave for the rest of their lives, and they know that their master went into the ground there, and they miss him, and so they sleep there because that's the last contact they had with him. Elephants have been known that when one of their group dies, and they mourn and they cry over that death, they have been known to go back even when the body has been removed, but they go back to the place. They remember the place where their family member died, and so they mourn and they cry. I saw a water buffalo in India that was crying and mourning and in sort of shock because of it had a stillborn calf. This water buffalo was just, its eyes big, and it was rocking back and forth and moaning. And I said, I looked at that facial expression and I thought, what's wrong? Something is really, really sad and they told me that there had been a stillborn calf, and so the mom had been expecting to be a mom, and suddenly the baby was gone, and so this was crying, mourning, sorrow. So my dad once shot a bird in India. He was a very young man, and he loved hunting, and he was shooting at everything, and he shot this bird. And that whole night, the mate cried and cried, and later somebody told him, these birds mate for life. And so when they're gone, they just cried. He said, I will never kill one of those things again, because he was so sad about that he had caused that sorrow in that mate. So, sorrow over death. Yes, animals can feel. They can be lonely. They can miss a family member. They can grieve. But animals do not prepare their dead for the afterlife. You don't see animals burying or cremating their dead. You do not see grave goods down there. You do not see animals doing that. There's no concept of life after death. And guess what? The only human beings who don't believe in life after death are the human beings who think we're just animals. So you see, if they're just animals and they just think and they claim that we are just animals and we are not something beyond that, and they're the ones who don't believe that God exists. Okay, so I guess if you don't believe that God exists, and if the definition of human beings being created in God's image is God consciousness, eternity written in our hearts, then a person who doesn't believe that God exists, I guess that would be rather fitting for them to be animalistic. But there's a great inconsistency about this. When a human being acts like an animal, we don't let that go. If a tiger kills an antelope, or for that matter, if monkeys kill one monkey kills another monkey, and even eats part of it, which does happen. I'm not making this up, you know. When they do that, we say that's just natural. They just do that. They're doing what comes naturally. Well, if a human being kills another human being and would eat them, we would be horrified. You know, that's a crime. It's wrong. Well, where comes this right and wrong? Where come these categories of what is good and evil? If there's no God, if we're not made in God's image, if we have no consciousness of that, if we have no ability to know that, then why do we punish that? No, we punish that because human beings do have a consciousness of good and evil. Your dog knows that he made you angry and that he did something you don't like, and so he looks guilty because he knows that he displeased you. But an abstract consciousness of good and evil, of right and wrong, and something being wrong, not because it displeases somebody else, but because it is wrong in itself, that is something human beings know. The ethics, the good and evil, the God consciousness, the life after death, this is something human beings know. God said, let us make man in our image and in our likeness, and let them rule. This dominion of the creation is very much in evidence here that God has made men for this purpose. Let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock, the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. Notice we don't rule over the wild beasts. They're still wanting to eat us. So they're not tamed. They're not being ruled by us. We can kill them, but we can't rule over them. Now, to rule over the creation, somebody will come along and say, this is the problem, that we do dominate the creation, and this is the reign not of the dinosaurs but of the human beings to modify the planet to their own purposes, to destroy the creation. God did give human beings dominion, but he also, as we would see in chapter 3, he also told human beings to look after. Chapter 2, he told the human beings to look after, to care for the garden. So it's basically like this: I'm putting you in charge, and you take care of this place. And God says that, and the human beings are to, yes, exercise dominion. We exercise dominion when we go into the rainforest and find plants that make medicine. Okay, we exercise dominion when we harvest that plant and cut it and then turn it into medicine. We kill that plant. We exercise dominion when we kill the plant for food. We kill that because we need that for our own survival. But we have this dominion. We domesticate animals, okay, for our purposes, and that's also exercising dominion. But in addition to exercising dominion over the creation, we are also to take care of the creation. We're responsible for it. See, this is another thing. If you don't believe that God gave us creation care responsibility, then, and if you think we're just animals, just responsible for what pleases us and what we want to do, then in that case, what makes ecology something that we should do, something that is right to do? Why is that? Okay, after all, if the great wild animals, the lions and tigers and bears and the wolves and all of these predators, the jaguar of South America, or a wolf of the Russian steppe, or the tiger of South Asia, or the bears of whether they're from Alaska or Indonesia, if these creatures are competing with us for food. Okay? Example, here is a cow. I want to eat that cow or that buffalo or that deer or whatever it is. Okay? The human being wants to eat it. So does the tiger. The tiger may have bigger teeth, claws, strength, but the human being has a brain that enables him to develop a gun. So the human being tells the tiger, look, you want that meat, I also want that meat, and we're in competition for that meat. And you may be stronger and more than I am, but I'm smarter than you are, and I can make a gun that can kill you. So what is the endangered species now on Earth? Human beings? Not quite. The tigers are. And the human beings won that competition. So the people who say, well, it's just survival of the species, survival of the fittest, and the weaker ones go extinct. Okay, and that's been happening all through human history. All through natural history and in the history of the planet. And so if we kill off some of the predators, and so that we get the food, what is so immoral about that? If we are holding the human beings, hey, we're just doing what comes naturally. So God has created man in his image, and he has told us, in the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So God has told us to rule, but he has also told us to care for the planet. And notice that when we get to verse 27, male and female are both created in God's image. So, even though we use masculine pronouns for God, we know that God is not a physical being, that God doesn't have a Y chromosome, that God is a supernatural, spiritual being, and that male and female are both created in God's image. There's that word again. We are created in God's image, because, quite simply because we both have God consciousness. We both have an awareness of God. We both have an awareness of life after death. We both have an image of not just pleasing a human master, but of pleasing God, of doing what is right in God's sight. And things that are right or wrong are right or wrong. The definition comes from what God says, that they are right or wrong. God is not God because he does what is right. Instead, things are right because God says they are. God is the creator. He is the source of life, and he's the one who makes these rules. He is not made strictured by these rules, and or whoever made those rules would be God instead. Now, and there is no other one above the Creator to beyond the first cause. There is nobody else to tell that first cause what to do. There is only that original first cause, God the Creator. God blessed them. That means the male and the female. And he said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. He told the plants, the birds, the fish, the animals to be fruitful and increase in number and fill the earth. But to the human beings, he also adds, subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over every living creature that moves along the ground. Verse 29, then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. These will be yours for food. Okay, all the plants that he made in day 3 of creation, he gives those for food to the human beings. So this means then that the human beings, God's original plan was vegetarian, for human beings to be vegetarian. These will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and the birds of the air, and the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give the green plants for food. So this means not only the human beings, but the created universe, all those wild beasts that you saw. Originally, the plan is for them also to eat vegetation. That's the original plan. Now, when it shifts from that, of course, that is later, but it is the original plan is vegetarianism. And the Bible says that someday the wild animals will eat grass like oxen do, so that viciousness, that predation will be ended. That is part of the fallen nature that not only human beings but the whole created world has come under. Verse 31, God saw that all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, there was morning, the sixth day. We are now at the end of chapter 1. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing, and so on the seventh day he rested from all his work. Now, this is the beginning of the concept of Sabbath. Sabbath in Hebrew means rest. Or, to be more specific, it means to stop, to cease activity. See, God is not tired. God has all power. God is not resting because he's exhausted. God is simply ceasing to work on this day. And to this day, Jewish people celebrate their Sabbath for the same way, the evening and the morning. Sabbath day starts at sunset Friday evening and then continues to sunset Saturday evening. By the seventh day, God had finished the work that he had been doing, and so on the seventh day he rested from all of his work. It means he just stopped doing it. And God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. What is this word, holy? Well, this word bless, blessed, means to give it a sense of well-being, to give it a sense of God's favor, but especially a sense of well-being, of wholeness, of completeness, of goodness. And then he made it holy, and holy means it is separated. Now, unfortunately, over the decades and centuries, the concept of holiness has been emphasized into what it is separated from. But holiness also means what something is separated for. For example, and the two go together. Nebuchadnezzar took from Jerusalem the golden articles, golden cups from the temple of Jerusalem when he plundered, looted the place, and took these back to Babylon. His grandson, Belshazzar, when he was having a wild drinking party, he said, "Let's bring out the golden cups from the temple." Now, Nebuchadnezzar, for all of his egocentrism, had at least had the sense not to do that, but Belshazzar didn't, and so he said that these were for him to drink out of these. Now, why did God dislike this so much? It's because those golden vessels were made for the purpose of the temple. They were separated, they were specifically devoted, dedicated to temple use. And therefore, when he was using them for another purpose, the concept of their holiness, their dedication, their devotion was not being observed. And so God was not happy with him for that purpose. So you see, we are separated from pagan, secular, profane use. But the reason we are separated from that is because we are separated for God's purpose. And to apply this to us today, the book of Ephesians says that God has planned in advance good things for us to do. That's what we're separated for, you see? We're separated for God's purpose, and that's why we are separated from other purposes. So God has made this day holy because on this day he ceased the work that he was doing, the work of creating. And so God created a day of ceasing to work, of rest, not because he needed to rest. God never sleeps, God never slumbers, but we need that rest. There's a story. What did God do on the seventh day? Since God is not idle, the Bible, Jesus said people will have to answer for every idle word they tell. And since God is not lazy, God rebukes laziness. And since God but God ceased his work. But as the story goes, as legend has it, what God said is, on the seventh day, I'm going to distribute lifespan. So he told the animals, on the morning of the seventh day, I want you all to line up, and I'm going to distribute lifespan. So on the morning of the seventh day, the evening and the morning were the seventh day, then he had this figure, 30 years on his mind, nice round figure. And so the animals were lined up, and God said to the first one in line, which was a donkey, God said, 30 years, how about 30 years? And the donkey started to cry. You've never seen a happy-looking donkey. Donkeys always look like their whole family died yesterday. I have seen in my life, actually, one time a happy donkey, and that donkey was bucking around in joy because I guess it had been carrying heavy loads all day, and now it was free from that and it was happy. But that's rare, okay, and mostly donkeys look miserable. So the donkey started to cry. And God said, what's wrong? And the donkey said, don't you know? I said, the people are going to be putting horrible burdens on me. They're going to be putting huge loads on me, bricks and firewood and all kinds of things. So, and I'm not very big, and they're going to be just loading it down on me. And it said at the end of the long, hot day, then when those burdens are ended, they'll ride me, and I'm not very big, and their feet will almost be dragging the ground on either side. And then at the end of the long day, as the B&B lady in Cornwall said to me, I'm sorry, not Cornwall, Oban, Scotland, said to me, they probably won't even put a bucket of water over their back to cool me off. So, and now by this time God was crying, and he gave a handkerchief to the donkey, and the donkey dabbed aside. God said, right, I'll take 15 years. I know how did God know this in advance? Because God knows everything, okay? He knows the end from the beginning. God said, I will I'll take 15 years off. You keep the rest. So the donkey went away, sniffing and snuffling and snorting into the handkerchief and dabbing his eyes and so on. Next one in the line, camel. Now, camels are very bad-tempered, grouchy creatures, okay, ill-tempered creatures, and but they're very strong and very big. And of course, camels look weird. They look awkward. They look like they're made up of leftover parts. My father used to say that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. He said this back when he was in charge of committees in India, and then later on he became more diplomatic, and I didn't hear him say that after he was leading American committees, but it was still an accurate description. Now, the camel, God says, how about 30 years to the camel? And the camel says, 30 years in the desert? He said, and enjoy myself in that, because God had said, how about 30 years to enjoy yourself in the desert? And he said, the camel said, I can't believe that you're putting these words, enjoy, desert, and 30 years, all in the same sentence. Why did you make the desert anyway? He says, sand blows around everywhere. You get a sandstorm, and the sand gets in your eyes and in your nose and in your fur and then your hair, and then the dunes all change shape, and you don't know where you are, and then you have to go through days and days in the desert without water, and then suddenly you have to drink, after days and days of this, and you have to get to Oasis, and you have to drink gallons of the stuff to make up, and he said it's awful. And then on top of all of that, you have to work with the worst people on the face of the earth, the Arabs. Why did you make them? No, 30 years of that? No way, cut it down. And God looked at him and said, you got an attitude problem, but you're still a big, tough specimen. I'll take 10 years off, and you got to keep the other 20. So the camel went away grumbling and cursing. Third animal in the line, the dog. Dog, of course, is man's best friend. Dog wants to be helpful. And God said, how about 30 years? And the dog says, 30 years is a long time. And God said, but you won't have to carry burdens like the first two. And he said, but I'll have to herd sheep, and sheep are dumb, and they'll run right over the edge of a cliff if you don't stop them. And he said, He said, and not only that, I'd love to help. I've been do anything I can to help you. He says, I've always felt, because you're God, G-O-D, and I'm dog, D-O-G. So I've always felt that there was that I would like to do everything that I could to help. But he said 30 years is a very long time. And he said, and when I'm old, and I don't mind working, but when I'm old, I'll have to be sleeping by the fireplace, trying to stay warm, and then my master, he'll come home angry at somebody else and come home and kick me. And he said, so that. Well, that ingratitude, that's I'd like to reduce some of those older years. And God said, wow, that's an amazing attitude. That's certainly a lot better than the camel that I just finished talking to. And he said, okay, I'll take 10 years off, and you can keep the other. God said maybe 27 years or something, but it's he said we'll round it off. I'll take off 10, and you keep the other 20. The dog said, thank you. God said, these animals are discouraging each other. So he dismissed the guy, and he decided I'll go and talk to them out in the jungle, in the forest. He came across a monkey swinging through the branches on the vine, and like Tarzan. Or actually, Tarzan was doing it like the monkeys. So then God said to the monkey, he said, look, how about 30 years of just swinging around in the forest and having fun? And the monkey said, I know it looks like we're really having fun, but actually we're always afraid. And it says, because if we go down on the ground, there's the big animals, the ones, the rhinos, the lions and everything. They get the big heavy animals, the big tigers down there. They can get us. And then if we go up in the trees, there's the leopards. They can come up there and get us. The pythons, they can come and get us. And we're always trying to find something to eat, but at the same time, things are trying to eat us. And so it was really nerve-wracking and really scary. And then there's the bugs that get in our fur. And God looked at him and said, you don't have such a good excuse, I'll take 10 years off, but you keep the other 20. You can enjoy the other 20. And the monkey said, well, okay, good. And off the monkey went. Then God came to Adam and said, how about 30 years? And Adam said, 30 years? I can't get started in 30 years. He said, don't you have any more? God said, well, I can give you the 15 years I took off the dog, and I can give you the 15 years I took off the donkey. So Adam said, 30, 45, 60. And he said, that's still only 60 years. Don't you have any more? Are you sure you don't have some more in inventory that you're not telling me about? God said, look, I can give you the 10 years I took off the dog, the camel. I can give you the 10 years I took off the monkey. But that's not enough for you. Tough. That's what I got in inventory. And so that's where we get what we get. First, we get our own 30 years. See? Human years. And then after that come the 15 donkey years. This is from 30 to 45. When the loads on us get heavier and heavier, we start getting burdened down. And then come the 10 camel years, when we start grumbling and saying things are not what they were like when we were young, and now the whole world's going to pot. And we start grouching about this and that. That's 45 to 55. Then after that, we get the 15 dog years. These are the years when we're trying to still see what we can eat with the teeth we've got left, and they're trying to stay warm, and that takes us from 55 to 70. And then after that come the monkey years. These are the years for the second childhood, when you can basically do what you want, and everything's excused on account of your age. So now you can say, of course, as lifespan has expanded, you can adjust these figures. But in Psalm 90, Moses, who himself lived to be 120, but he says about human life generally, he says 70 years or 80 if we have the strength, and then we fly away. So now you know where Moses got those figures from the seventh day of creation that he wrote about right here in Genesis that we're reading about. So, God bless, and we are now at the end of that, and we will come in our next passage at chapter 2, verse 4.